Welcome to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. In studio with me today is Jenny Harjung. Jenny and her husband and her family actually were at the Highland Park parade when the shooting occurred. And I don't know about you, Jenny, but I do not like to use the criminal's name. I don't want to give him any notoriety, so we will attempt to not use his name during this podcast. The mass murderer is locked up. He's in jail. But as you sat there at the Highland Park parade, you and your family were right next to a victim of the shooting. Whether it was a direct shot or it was shrapnel, you were right in the midst of things. So let's just start off this podcast by telling us about that day, about how you were feeling, and take us through the moment where the shooting started to break out and what happened after that.
Okay. So my family and I have traditionally gone to the parade every year, with the exception of the last 2 years because of COVID, so they didn't have it. So we sit in the same spot every single year. It's usually my husband, my boys, my mother-in-law, and my dad and stepmom. So it's like a family tradition. So this year we decided, the boys are 11 and 14. They are kind of over the parade, but we figured we hadn't been to it for the past 2 years. Let's go ahead and go. So the plan was to go to the parade and then go to the pool afterwards. So we were all packed up for the pool, drove up to the parade, parked the car, proceeded to walk to our spot. It's interesting. I've told people in talking about it that for whatever reason, when we pulled up that morning, and my mom could attest to this, we pulled up and typically like the whole place is hopping, the parking lot's full, there's, bodies everywhere walking up and down the street. And for some reason, it was very eerily quiet. And I don't know why. It was just, I literally called my dad from the car who was meeting us, and I said, Dad, are you sure there's a parade today? And he's like, yeah, why? And I'm like, well, we just pulled up and the whole parking lot's empty and I don't really see anyone. So we walked to our spots, we sat down. There were just pretty much chairs lined up everywhere, not so much people in them, just the chairs themselves, because I think people tend to go have breakfast and go do things, and then they save their spots and they come back. So when we got there, it was mostly chairs lined up, and then slowly but surely, the crowd started, the chairs started filling up. People were walking to their seats, sitting down. And, I say this because my 11-year-old and 14-year-old boys, he keeps bringing this up, my 11-year-old, but right before the parade started, he said to me, Mom, I'm really, really hungry. Can we go get some food? And I'm like, oh, Troy, come on. Can't you just have a snack? Let's just wait till we get to the pool. He was getting hangry. So I'm like, okay, we'll go go get some food. So we ran down the street to this little gem called Country Kitchen where everyone goes. So we're sitting there, we order the food, we're waiting, get the food, and literally as the parade was starting, we ran back to our seats. Saw someone, they said hi, I waved hi back, got to our seats. I want to say maybe 5 minutes later, as I tell the story over again, I always tell people I cannot remember if I thought it or if I actually voiced it out loud, but I remember standing up and I heard pow, 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 pow. Like, I'll never get the sounds out of my head, ever. And I either said or thought to myself, this is not part of the parade. No sooner had I thought it or said it, literally, Jeannie, in slow motion, I keep replaying this in my head, you just see all the people just turn towards our direction, they turned towards the east and just started running. And it clicked, it registered. As soon as I heard the shots, and then 2 seconds later, everyone starts running, and I'm sure people yelled, shooter. And, they say in these types of situations, it's either fight, flight, or freeze. I flew. My adrenaline started pumping. I grabbed my boys, and I said, run. And we ran like bats out of hell. I was trying to make sure they were in front of me, trying to make sure that I didn't lose them. We're running. They're asking me what's going on. I'm like, there's a shooter, go. So we turned a street, then turned into an alley. Now, I have to tell you, we didn't realize at the moment he was on the roof. And in hindsight, I guess it doesn't really matter whether he was on the roof or on the street, but in our minds, we thought he was on the street, and it sounded like he was running behind us. So when you're in that situation, my boys keep saying we were running, and all we thought was we're going to get shot in the back. We're going to get shot in the back because we thought he was behind us. You obviously can't ever run fast enough when you're trying to outrun a bullet. So we were running. Again, we ended up in an alley. I'm looking around. You know, there's nowhere safe to go when you're in that predicament. There's mass people, just chaos, people falling on the floor. We ended up going through the back of a parking garage, and we see a woman on her stoop, and she's completely like panicked. We're panicked. She has some people around her. So I make eye contact with her, and she's like, my husband is right behind you. He has the keys. So I turn around, older gentleman, so he wasn't moving very fast. I grab the keys out of his hand, run him up, give him to her, and then she opens the door quickly, and we all proceed to file in her house, and we run to the basement. And there's probably like 30 of us in there. Poor woman has a broken elbow, so she's sitting in there. We ended up staying there for like 3 hours. You know, I called my family, but in the interim, my husband, I have such guilt for this, Jeannie. And to this, I think I'll forever have guilt for this. I know that I was right in my instincts, like mama bear kicked in. So I know that I was right in grabbing my boys and running. Mm-hmm. But I forever will have guilt because I'm like, how could I just dismiss my dad and my mother-in-law and my husband and my stepmom? How could I just, like, without a second's thought, just leave them behind and go? But I know that, you know, I guess I knew they're adults. They can fend for themselves. I need to get my boys to safety. So, Mom, you went with Chris and my dad and stepmom. They ended up going to a business right across the street. It was a winery. And before that happened, my husband...
So even within the midst of the chaos, family units themselves separated and split up.
Oh, I'm sure.
Just went wherever they could find cover.
Yeah, it was like, man, I've never seen anything like it. Mm-hmm. And my husband, he told me once I got to speak with him after all this was done, he told me that he heard the lady next to him say, I'm hit. The minute she said, I'm hit, I think it kind of put his ass in gear a little bit, excuse my French, and he got down and knelt behind a cement block, as did my stepmom. Once the coast was clear or they felt safe enough to get up, they ran towards the winery where my dad and mother-in-law were. And then my husband decided to come back and try to help. So he made his way back, and he actually took a video just to show like the chaos and like the war zone it looked like. But
so how long do you think what you've just described, how long was that time frame?
It's interesting because he shot off 83 rounds in 57 seconds. Bad shot too. Thank God he wasn't a great shot, because there was the buildings were riddled with bullet holes, and but it was very quick. And I think my husband probably made his way back once maybe a couple minutes had, you know, came and gone, and he realized that, you know, it was quote unquote safer. He went back and he was trying to, you know, go see who needed help. And there were just, you know, a bunch of people around each victim. He saw that 8-year-old boy, swore he was dead. So glad he's not.
Mm-hmm. The young man who's paralyzed now.
Who, God help him. He's
a twin too, as well, if I remember the story correctly.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And he's really been, you know, up and down. You know, they'll have progress and then a setback, and then progress and then a setback. But
so, what did you understand to be the police's? What were they doing at this time? The police that were there.
Well, I got to say,
probably just for traffic control purposes for the parade, not expecting something like this.
Right. Obviously, I wasn't there to witness any of it, but I know that, you know, people are saying, thank God that the ambulances and the fire trucks that are in the parade every year, thank God that they were there, because they were able to, you know, be there versus waiting for them to come. But I've talked to people, like friends of mine who were at the Deerfield parade at the time, and I guess as soon as this happened, the Deerfield parade hadn't started yet, and there were already cops telling everyone, go home, go home, go home. And then some friends I had that were driving said they just saw, police from everywhere just flying, coming to the scene. But
what were your boys? You're huddled in someone you don't know's basement for 3 hours. What were your boys saying?
It's interesting. You would think that once we got to where we were and, being in that house in the basement.
Did you feel safe there?
That was what I was going to say. Safer, yes. You would think that we would have felt a lot safer than we actually did. We felt safer because we were in a house that was locked, but at the time we didn't know how many there were, where they were. Like I said, we didn't know he was on the roof yet, so it sounded and felt like he was, could have been behind us. So we felt safer, but not as safe as one would think being in a locked house. But, my boys, especially my 11-year-old, was hysterical. He was upset because we got separated from my family. So he's like, make sure they're okay. Called, spoke with everyone. Thank God everyone was okay. And he kept saying, I am not leaving this basement until a police escorts us out. I am not leaving. I am not leaving.
So is that what happened?
Yeah, there was a lot of little kids there. A lot of them were very upset, obviously, crying. So we didn't have the TVs on. So we weren't really aware of what was going on other than, our phones. So I ended up I wasn't really thinking clearly, obviously, because I was so distraught, but I ended up trying to Facebook message a cop friend of mine who works in Highwood, the town over. Sent him a message, said, we're hiding in a basement. Please contact me when you can. A couple hours went by. Then some of the people started to get a little antsy. They're like, okay, we can have so-and-so pick us up. And the owner of the house, bless her, Karen Britton and your husband, thank you forever. You're angels. But she was like, if you leave, you cannot come back, because she was scared for her safety. Her daughter was actually Vernon Hills police officer, and her daughter said, stay where you're at. He hasn't been caught yet. Shelter in place. So
that was the concern at that point. The perpetrator was still on the loose.
Yeah.
Nobody knew who he was.
Correct.
Looking back now, do you or friends of yours or people that were at the parade, do they recall him now that the creep's face has been all over social media? Does anybody recall him sort of moving in with the crowd? Does anybody remember that?
That I don't know.
Okay.
I know that there was pictures. I saw 2 pictures in particular. One of him, I think he had a mask on and he was in a blue shirt. So I'm guessing it's maybe, I don't know if it's the shot they caught on camera of him arriving. Must have been, because then there was another shot of him leaving, because when he did this, he was dressed in woman's clothing. He was trying to, with the intention of blending in with the crowd. So I can't.
Because what do we know? It's a lot less likely that you have a female shooter on the loose than you do have a young male.
100%.
I mean, that has been the story, unfortunately, for the past few months. From Uvalde to the Buffalo shooter, and even before then, it's these young males that are the perpetrators mostly.
Correct.
So he knew what he was doing. He intentionally knew that he would be more likely to be not found out if he was dressed like a female.
Correct. And I initially thought when they caught him, I know, it's sick. I initially thought that he was wearing a wig. It turns out it was his long hair, but he had covered up with makeup his tattoos. So you couldn't see his neck tattoo. So he had on this hideous, I think it was a flower dress, I don't remember, and then he had his long hair.
So are you actually a Highland Park resident? Do you live in Highland Park?
Born and raised in Highland Park, went to Highland Park High School, but I actually live in Highwood now. I live and work in Highwood.
Okay, so right next door.
But my son will be a freshman in the fall at Highland Park High School.
Okay, well, we want to talk about school safety here in a moment. We totally want to talk about it. But so, I mean, Highland Park, very liberal city, very liberal. And I served in the state legislature in 2013 at the time that we were under court order to pass concealed carry legislation. And I've covered this for my listeners on other podcasts, so you're familiar with the story here. But we were under court order because we were the last state in the union to pass concealed carry legislation. As part of that, there was a preemptive clause put in saying that only the state can essentially make the rules surrounding personal protection and surrounding your ability to carry a weapon.
Right.
And in doing so, they did give particular municipalities, since you were preempting municipalities from making their own rules around this, they said if you had a ordinance on the books that basically banned an assault weapon, to say, or you would put one on the books within 10 days of the passage of the legislation or the signature of the governor on the legislation, then that would be fine. Well, Highland Park, who has the same mayor in 2013 as they have right now, and I forgot the woman's name.
Nancy Rottering.
Yes, so they put that in. They put an assault weapons ban in place in Highland Park. It doesn't appear to have stopped the shooter. Didn't matter to him.
No.
But let's talk about some of the other failures that I think are probably more prominent in this case.
Sure.
I mean, when you look at the perpetrator's background now, looking back, it seems to me that there were quite a few red flags, quote unquote, and we in Illinois has a red flag law that were absolutely missed by many others. So how do you feel about all that in the wake of this tragic event? I mean, it's just horrible. 7 folks dead, dozens wounded, people who are going to fear for their life just walking down the street or going to any other public event for the rest of their lives. How do you feel about all the red flags that were missed?
Yeah, he definitely slipped through the cracks, I'll tell you that. I think they spoke with his coach, or they labeled it the coach. It was his PE teacher at some point, and he spoke to the effect of, this was the kid that was always the last kid to be picked up at school. Sometimes they would have to call his parents because his parents had either forgot about him or just, they were late, whatever it was. I don't understand how someone, I don't know, I don't have the exact story. I don't know if he dropped out of high school at 16. Some people have said that his parents pulled him out. But I don't know how you drop out of high school or you let your kid, you pull your kid out of high school and there's no follow-up there. I know he had, teachers were concerned, counselors were concerned. I don't understand how, from a mental health aspect, that no one ever, followed up with him or.
But okay, so let's move forward to mental health. There's obviously reports that he was suicidal, and the police were called.
I heard he had 3 attempts. I don't know if that's correct, but
there's reports that he threatened family members, and the police were called and took away weapons, knives, multiple knives, and then a couple of years later, his dad signs off on allowing him to purchase a gun.
Yeah, I don't understand that. As far as they came in, they confiscated these weapons, took them from him, and then I think it was the Illinois State Police, if I'm not mistaken, gives them back because his father states that they're his.
Well, that was probably local police that gave it back.
Either or.
But it's the Illinois State Police that authorizes
You're correct.
Your ability to get what they call a FOID card, a firearms owner's identification card. I have one. I also have a CCL. I've been through all the backgrounds, as have a number of other people. But we're assured by them, and we've been assured by the most liberal legislators in the state. Let's be honest here. That this is going to prevent all of these things from happening, and it didn't. It didn't at all. So I mean, I go back to a couple things. One, the red flags were there. It appears like they were ignored, and in response, just to let you know, just last week, the Governor Pritzker directed the Illinois State Police to implement emergency rules broadening the definition of clear and present danger reports. These reports can bar persons from possessing guns by prohibiting the issuance of or the revocation of a firearms owner identification card. The new emergency rules clarify ISP's authority to use and retain such reports as allowed by state and federal law. ISP's argument had always been that they could not look far enough back into clear and present danger reports, and that is how the perpetrator got a FOID card eventually, after having his father swear or sign off on his receipt of that FOID card. So there's a few different things here. Now, this new emergency rule for my listeners, it goes in effect. It's probably in effect right now because it goes into effect within 10 days of filing. And Pritzker filed that. I want to say it was July 20th that he filed that. And it's limited in effectiveness to no more than 150 days. So something's going to have to be done if they want to permanently tighten up that clear and present danger report. I just find it interesting because in a Fox News article, the National Police Association spokesperson, Betsy Bratner, and this is the National Police Association. I didn't say the National Rifle Association or something like that. This is the National Police Association. That spokesperson, so she's about policing. Police, believe me, they want tight rules too on people who own guns because they don't want to be the victim of a gun crime either by an illegal person. So they're just as much at risk. I find them to be just as much as concerned about who has and doesn't have weapons.
Sure.
But this spokesperson said that the Highland Park shooter should not have been able to legally buy firearms under existing law. And others have also noted that the Highland Park shooter had a known drug use, which under both federal and state law would have disallowed the purchase and possession of weapons. So
and the guy passed 4 background checks.
Yeah, it's a conundrum, right? Because we do have we have to admit here, we've got a lot of laws in place to prevent this from happening, and including, Highland Park's like, hey, you can't possess, own, not just sell, which now Naperville is trying to prevent the sale of quote unquote assault weapons. And I say quote unquote because they also want to prevent the sale of any handgun that's of a certain caliber as well. So Naperville just wants to prevent the sale. Well, Highland Park, you couldn't do anything with that, and it didn't matter at all. So tell me, I have a theory about what matters. I say parents matter.
Mm-hmm. Oh, 100%. I feel like it starts. Listen, this creep didn't. He wasn't born a nut job.
No,
he wasn't.
No.
Things transpired throughout his life. And that ultimately, I think, was a really big part of what he became. His mother was arrested. I think when he was 2 years old, his mother was arrested for leaving him in a car at Toys R Us, windows up, completely enclosed for 28 minutes when she was inside. I mean, little stuff like that, like just the complete disregard, lack of attention, non-engagement. I think that he obviously had issues, and I think they just progressively got worse.
So, I mean, I think that there's places to find common ground with liberals who maybe want to go overboard on some of these gun laws. I think there's a place here to find common ground. I think most of us feel that perhaps if you're the parent and you're signing off on a FOID card for your son, then maybe if things happen and he's not of age yet, that's why the parent had to sign off on it, because he was not of age yet, then maybe you should be held responsible.
100%. Listen,
I don't see how that is a problem.
You're vouching for them. You're, it's like when you co-sign on a car. If something, it's like you are stating that you are responsible. Right. You're vouching for them.
Right.
So you should have some idea to their character, and you signing off is kind of a, saying, okay, well, I believe that he is going to be responsible and he should have a gun.
I think another thing that we should be looking at is this thought coming from the National Police Association spokesperson, basically saying that he should not have been able to legally buy firearms under existing law. Well, why aren't our elected officials looking further into that?
Right.
Now Pritzker is saying that there were loopholes that we need to tighten up. You know what? There seems to be a little bit of debate about that. So I think that there should be some sort of task force or investigation done as to what laws were not followed by the government officials. Right. How did this guy get a firearm?
Right. 100%.
So we have a lot of laws in place. Nobody wants somebody like this to have a gun. Let's just put it.
100%. And listen, I'm not anti-gun.
Mm-hmm.
I am anti-assault weapons.
Oh, and I'm not saying that you are, but
no, I'm just saying.
Yes. Okay,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, there's that's probably a topic for a different conversation because the term assault weapons gets bandied about by a lot of
Something
different
that
people.
has a clip that can shoot 83 rounds.
Yeah, those
a
are,
civilian, I don't know.
Essentially, those are illegal anyway. You can't modify clips like that.
Well,
so
that kind of
so those are essentially a problem anyway.
And that's what I keep saying, Jeannie, as the gun laws, fine. We might need stricter gun laws, be that as it may.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not, I'm saying that, but the problem is that takes a long time. And in the interim, I think instead of focusing primarily on the gun aspect, it's, let's implement stronger security measures in our schools. You have synagogues.
Because you wanted to talk about school safety in the wake of the Uvalde situation, which was a disaster,
for a lack of better words.
Oh
yes.
my! I don't know how else. It's
I know
heart wrenching that for an hour and 7 minutes, 11 minutes. I don't remember what it was. They stood by and let that guy go at it, and the fact that he even got into the school is a problem. Is there a discussion up in your neck of the woods?
Well, here's
now
the thing
about tightening school safety measures because, again, and I got to point this out. Like here in Wheaton, in our schools, in our high schools, we have a school resource officer. He's a police officer, and he's there to help tamp things down, be a watchful eye out there, around in case something goes awry. Now that didn't help very much in the Parkland shooting in Florida, where the police officer hid behind a car and didn't do anything.
Right.
Okay, that's a problem. It didn't help in Uvalde that they were supposed to have a resource officer there, but there was a legislation that was presented last year in Illinois that would make sure that there would be no school resource officers in our public schools. None. They want to basically defund or de-police schools. I don't now. What are you suggesting? What's the talk
that
up there?
Just makes me livid. My blood boils.
Ann Stava Murray, that's what she voted for here. If you're listening in Downers Grove, she's your state rep.
Yeah, not cool, Ann.
Okay.
So
what are you thinking? Because I agree that in the wake of this, we need to look at how do we make schools a true safe space for children.
I am a plan for the worst, hope for the best. Okay.
Okay.
There's been I don't know the exact number. There's been over 300 school shootings. Okay. I'm not saying it's just schools. It happens at churches, synagogues, grocery stores, wherever it is. I'm concentrating on the school aspect because I have 2 boys, and they've made it very clear that, especially my incoming freshman, he's scared. He doesn't want to go to school without specific security measures in place. So for me, I'm kind of concentrating more on the school aspect.
Sure.
I think that we need it all. You have these shooting drills, and I'm all for them as much as they make me cringe, and it's sick that we have to think about them doing it. My boys come home, and I ask them all the time after they've done these drills, what did you learn today? How do you feel about it? And they always tell me what they've done, and then they tell me, the shooting drills are great, Mom. The only problem is the shooters in there learning them with us, which is potentially the case because most of these shooters, white young males, have gone to the school or have some affiliation. So that, every time I say it, makes me chills up my spine, and they're correct. I want to see the drills go on, but I want to see metal detectors in the schools. We need to implement layers of protection. These are our children. They are our most precious cargo, okay? They go to school every day with backpacks because they're at school and they have their books in their backpack. They need metal detectors in the schools. Everyone that walks in the school, be it a teacher, staff member, kid, they should all go through metal detectors. I'm one for armed guards as well. In Highland Park where we live, I love my town, but because it's tends to be a bubble, which I stated clearly burst, there's such stigma. I've met a lot of opposition and resistance, I don't want my kids to go to a school and feel like it's a prison because they're metal detectors. Really? Do you go to the airport? Do you travel with your kids? They're okay. They're not traumatized because they go through a metal detector. They will be okay. Have that open conversation with your child. Have that open dialogue. Tell them why you're going through a metal detector. Tell them why they're seeing armed guards standing outside with, weapons or whatever. Explain to them, this is in place to protect you. God forbid should ever anything happen, these are in place to protect you. What's more traumatic, Jeannie? Seeing an armed guard with a gun or going through a metal detector every day, or God forbid, someone bringing a gun to school and shooting the school up? What is more traumatic? I don't understand how, as a parent at this point, after having this happen in your own town, how you aren't willing to do anything and everything you can to protect your kid. And if that means going through a metal detector every day, listen, there's new technology out there. It's not all your traditional metal detectors.
Right.
There's things you can walk under and you walk through, you don't even know you're walking through a metal detector.
Right.
And they can differentiate between keys and knives or guns.
Right.
It's just, you go to the Louis Vuitton store, there are armed guards there. Why are we protecting our purses and not our children?
I think it's a great point.
I don't understand.
It's a great point.
I was talking to a young lady this morning, got my shirt from Just About Died. My girlfriend, all the proceeds go to the Highland Park victims, and I was there picking it up.
Oh, that's great. Could you tell? Yeah, I didn't even know. I was wondering what
shout
that
out
shirt
to
was
Kim
about.
Linton Strauss. Her company is Just About Died, and she tie-dyes everything pretty much. And right after this happened, people wanted to represent Highland Park. So, I have my bracelet on, and this is a shirt, and her company is Just About Died. So all the proceeds go to the victims. But when I was there picking up the shirt, the mother said in Israel, all the schools have metal detectors. They all have armed guards.
Yes.
A lot of these churches and synagogues, or I don't know about churches, synagogues, Jewish schools, they have armed guards. Why don't our schools? It's a no-brainer at this point. Like, it makes my blood boil.
Well, and there's, fortunately, you had the Indiana Mall shooter stopped within 15 seconds by a man who had a concealed carry license, who was authorized to carry, who was a darn good shot because he shot him from a distance and didn't hit anybody else. But he stopped it cold in 15 seconds.
Yep.
So, I think, I would always like to get to the root cause of the issue, which is, why do we have people
100%
shooting up? Is that one of those evils that we are going to be a part of our society? So the best thing we can do is protect ourselves, or is it something that we can do something about? I don't know. I think that we need to talk a little bit more about marriage and parenting, and how important that is. To be doing it together. I firmly believe there was a one more thing I wanted to read from. I wrote a reveille the other day. I do these 2-minute reveilles, and I wrote this one on Parents Matter. And in 2019, Jillian Peterson and James Densley studied the background of mass shooters dating back to 1966. In an LA Times opinion piece, they laid out common factors among mass shooters. First was that the vast majority of mass shooters experienced early childhood trauma and exposure to violence at a young age, including parental suicide, physical or sexual abuse, neglect, domestic violence, and or severe bullying. Their study was done before Buffalo, Uvalde, and Highland Park. Information coming out on the shooters in those places largely support their conclusion. So that's what we have going on. And I went on to say that, in Chicago, 321 people have been shot and killed, and another 1,431 have been wounded. And that's according to the website heyjackass.com. You can get all your Chicago crimes info there. So here's the deal, 57% of the carjackings are committed by juvenile suspects. What the hell is going on? What is going on in these families?
100%. And if I may, I remember reading good old Facebook. I remember reading a mother had posted something, and it was it's something to the effect of, like, I asked my son why he thinks kids do this and they go and shoot up schools, and she's like, I think he gave the best response I've ever heard, and he said, it's not about guns per se, Ma, it's about attention. It's about these kids are at home, they get no attention from their parents, and this is like their attention, like their claim to fame, if you will.
And that's why we will not say the shooter's
100%.
name. And I think media should try and do the same. So, well, Jenny, I want to thank you for sharing your story with my listeners. This has been very informative, and it's great to hear from firsthand what happened and what the aftermath is. And so I absolutely appreciate and applaud what you're doing.
Thank you.
To turn this tragedy into something that we learn from, and that in the end, hopefully we protect our schools better. And I know this wasn't a school shooting, but that's certainly the first place that we can start in the wake of the Uvalde massacre.
That's the kind of my way. That's been my way, Jeannie, of kind of, dealing with it and healing is, my kids made it clear that, this is something that they wanted to see and it would make them feel safer. And they, asked me, could I make it happen? And I said, I can't promise you I'll make it happen, but I could promise you that I will, make some noise louder than the gunshots that keep going off in my head. I will make some noise, make some waves, and do my best to see that, we can implement these security measures, because I think at this point it's a no-brainer. Why anyone would be opposed to it, I could not for the life of me understand.
And in the meantime, we need to have some investigations about how this one fell through the crack, because I think he should have been stopped long before he took residency on top of a rooftop and decided to, murder people on the 4th of July. So a lot of answers still to be made, a lot of answers still to be had, and a lot of questions still to be asked.
Thank you, Jeannie.
Thank you. And that's it for The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Welcome to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. I'm recording this for my podcast, but I am also recording this live. So thank you for following me on Instagram and on Facebook. I really appreciate it. Again, you can connect with my, you can find my podcasts on our website, breakthrough-ideas.com. You connect with it also on Spotify, on an Apple Podcast. You can find it there. But I want to go live because I'm really bothered by taxpayer fraud. I actually got into politics because I cared about the taxpayers' bottom line. That's why I started out on Wheaton City Council. Very, very quickly, after just one negotiation with the unions, I figured out that if you want to protect taxpayers, you have to go to Springfield. So I ran for state representative. And in every case, every time I've ran, I've really tried to focus on what's happening with taxpayers, because the idea that the government takes in your money by force, by the way, because if you don't pay your taxes, guess what? They'll take your property or throw you in jail. Then we need to be responsible with that tax money. They should be responsible. They're not. When it comes to taxpayer money, I got to tell you, it's one scam after another. And now, nobody doubted that there was going to be fraud when the government doled out in just 2 years $4.5 trillion of COVID relief money. I mean, you'd have to be an idiot not to suspect that some fraud was going to occur. But now, we're well past, 3 weeks to flatten the curve. Everybody stay home. We're well past all that. We've been at this COVID crap for over 2 years. And the fraud continues. They're taking your money and using it for reasons and purposes that is not the reason that they purported to vote for trillions of dollars in COVID relief money for. Let's just face it. I mean, there were plenty of us who got none or very little COVID relief money. We were told we were essential workers. We were told that we're going to take a pay cut. Our kids were pushed into remote learning. We never collected unemployment benefits. We never got tested for COVID. We never had a problem with it. And now we are literally bailing people out when we got punished by COVID and the lockdowns. So here's the deal. This is the story that caught my eye, and this is really why I wanted to talk about this on my podcast and actually come live with you. So here's the story. It's from the Chicago Tribune. Cook County hopes to eliminate $1 billion in residents' medical debt. Here's how they're doing it. Well, you guess what? Debtors will not need to apply to get the relief, nor will the debt forgiveness count against them when they file their taxes. Picking up the tab, Cook County government will pay a nonprofit group over the next 3 years to buy medical debt accumulated at hospitals across Cook County for pennies on the dollar. Pennies on the dollar. They plan to abolish $1 billion in medical debts that could date back over 7 years. 7 years. That is way past the time frame of COVID. But yet you're going to be bailing them out. And here's what's going on. Tony Preckwinkle is using COVID relief funds to wipe out the medical debts. The program is now considered innovative, and in fact, she's due to receive an award from the White House for her creative use of your tax dollars. That's what she's doing. She's going to buy up medical debt that has nothing to do with COVID. And yet that money is all coming from the American Relief Program. That's where it's coming from. It's COVID money. She's buying out debt. It's nonsense. But of course, COVID funding and COVID relief money has been a scam from the get-go. One of the biggest problems that we've had is with the unemployment fund. So I'm just going down here a few of the lists of the scams that have happened. The first one, of course, is you're bailing out medical debt with COVID relief money. That's wrong. That's wrong. The other one is an actual fraud. The actual fraud is for nearly $400 billion in unemployment funds are thought to have been given out fraudulently. A Forbes article laid this all out. It says that during the chaotic days of the pandemic, it's alleged that an international ring of nefarious fraudsters stole over $400 billion from the United States government. This staggering amount is about 50% of the unemployment monies paid out. So, yep, that's right. The smart people figured out very quickly that a lot of this money was going to the wrong people. In fact, unemployment fraud during the pandemic could easily reach $400 billion, Axios reported. The money likely ended up in the hands of foreign crime syndicates, making it not just theft, but a matter of national security. All right, well, we know that at least Illinois, go here. Oh, here we go. Illinois policy. A state audit found that the Illinois Department of Employment Security lost to fraud more than half of the $3.6 billion in federal COVID-19 dollars earmarked for out-of-work Illinoisans. So nearly $2 billion in unemployment benefits went to crooks during the pandemic. Now, that's actual fraud. That's actual fraud. The stuff that Preckwinkle's doing and getting awards for, in my opinion, that's fraud too. It's just that it's celebrated and the media, openly publishes articles about it and nobody seems to care. Well, what else is going on? Guess what else you're paying for? Oh, here you go. There's a $15 million city pilot that's going to help South Shore condo owners fund repairs. Okay. And this money also apparently is going to be helped along with money that was needed to be used for COVID relief. Okay, what else is going on? Here you go. Water shutoffs. Water shutoffs for bill non-payment is now banned from Chicago's residential community. Well, how are they paying that? It's all this American relief money because they are flooded with money, and now Lightfoot can go ahead and just pay off your water bill. What else is happening? Oh, here's one of my favorites. The Housing Committee is going to give some Illinois residents up to $25,000 in one-time grants to pay back bills on their rent. So COVID has been around for a long time. And yet these people should have been back to work a long time ago. Part of this is Pritzker's problem and the Democrat problems for just keeping this COVID open and keeping people shut out of work. But now you, the taxpayer, are going to give people $25,000 grants to pay back rent for up to 18 months. It says the Illinois rental program will provide an additional $297 million in taxpayer dollars to renters and landlords to prevent evictions. Now, this isn't something that happened a year ago. No, this is a story from the Center Square from July 21st of 2022. You are continuing to bail out people one program after another. What else is happening? Well, the Illinois Tollway is using COVID relief money to eliminate fines for unpaid tolls. So now we have to pay people's fines for their unpaid tolls. What are they using? They're using American Relief money again. That's COVID money. And Chicago Public Schools are using relief money on pay and benefits for thousands of teachers and staff that are already on the payroll. This is ridiculous. You're being taken advantage of by your own government, and then people like Preckwinkle are going to go to Washington, D.C. and get awards for their innovative use of your tax money, which is really COVID relief money, but now you're paying off people's medical debt. It can't get crazier in this state. They're just abusing you as the taxpayer. I'll tell you what, I mean, the only way to limit this is to change out the politicians that are in charge. That's what you have to do, because I personally think none of this fraud is acceptable, absolutely none of it. And whether it's actual fraud like the unemployment fraud or the fraud that you're using COVID relief money to pay off people's tollway fines, that's fraud too, in my opinion. So thanks for joining me on The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. Pay attention. We've got a lot more policy issues to roll out ahead of the elections. We think you need to make an informed vote in November, and we're going to give you that valuable information. So thanks for listening. Welcome back to The Real Story with Jeannie Ives. On the phone with me is Tom DeVore. He is the Republican candidate for Attorney General here in the state of Illinois. He's also been the champion of numerous parents and students since the start of COVID, as he has just challenged the governor and the court system as to whether or not they can mask children. Tom, I asked for you to come on to The Real Story because all of a sudden it looks like Waukegan is about ready to go ahead and put masks back on children. I'm shocked, but this newsletter just came out. It was posted on in June, and it says that now that Lake County is apparently at high risk, and that they are considering that mask requirement impacts staff and visitors during the summer, as well as students enrolled in summer school. So it looks like they've already put masks back on. And now there's a lot of concern that they're going to continue this into the school year. I imagine they're not the only school district. What are you hearing from around the state, and what do you plan to do about it?
Well, I don't represent any parents in the Waukegan school district, so there's not a whole lot there. But yeah, I had heard about that. You know, what's interesting, Jeannie, is that the whole message has changed from a year ago. And what you have right now is, when you said that Lake County with high transmission, actually, if you look at the CDC's information based upon their data, I almost laugh when I use that word anymore. They say that 94 out of the 102 counties in Illinois are at the high transmission level. So Lake County is not unique in that regard. But what you're not hearing is, you don't hear a peep out of the governor, right? He is absolutely silent on this topic. The Illinois Department of Health website is devoid of anything remotely similar to what it had a year ago. And the best they have done is on June 27th, I think, they issued guidance. And I talked to the Tribune today about that guidance that they issued. And it uses the word encourage and should and ought to. It's very wishy-washy, because they know that politically they're not going to touch this issue at the state level. And so some of these school districts are now trying to, take the position that they have local inherent authority. It's not real widespread. I don't likely suspect you'll see more than a handful of school districts statewide try to do this. And to the extent any of them do that, that's in the lawsuits that we're in, we'll deal with it in the courtroom. But it's not going to be widespread. And about a week ago, I actually gave the governor like a triple dog dare of, put some more of this stuff back in place, Governor, because I don't think he's got what it takes to do it, because he knows that it's a bad thing for him to do election-wise.
Well, I didn't talk to you back when the news broke just about 10 days ago, but essentially he already had to back away from his own latest 30-day extension of emergency COVID rules when the colleges started to get some complaints. And you were ready to actually have another court hearing, I believe, on whether or not they can mandate vaccines and testing at colleges. And so he had to back away from that. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, on June 22nd, we filed a lawsuit in Madison County, Illinois. I didn't even talk about it much, where we sued the governor and 11 school districts, arguing that, because every one of those school districts had taken the position that they were merely following the governor's executive order. All of their propaganda that they put out, they were using the governor as a scapegoat. They never tried to take the position, well, we have our inherent authority. They never did it. So the governor knows that he cannot afford politically another loss the way that he lost in February. And if you remember, Jeannie, actually the 4th Appellate District, when we went up on the kids' mask case and the vaccine case, the appellate court said specifically that the governor by himself, without any lawfully adopted administrative rules, has no authority to mandate any of this. And so he knew he was in a tough spot. That's why he lifted that executive order about 10 days ago, is because he knew that he was going to have a problem in Madison County, and he didn't want to have to take that political risk.
Well, so the injunction that happened in February, though, is that done yet, or do you have more work to do in terms of finalizing that parents always have the right to make decisions about their children's health?
No, that case is still pending, and here's the interesting part. Here's the interesting part of that case, Jeannie, is right now during the summer and for the last few months, no school district, zero, even Chicago, they don't have a blanket mask policy. It doesn't exist, okay? And so they're all trying to get this case dismissed by taking the position. Well, there is one of the 145 that has a mask policy. That's a separate conversation. But they're all trying to get out of this case and get it dismissed by saying there's nothing to argue about now because there is no mask requirements in our schools, et cetera. And what they're trying to do, they think they're clever. They're not. They want to get the case dismissed, and then they want to all implement their mask mandates again. So, that's not going to happen.
Oh, you're kidding me. Say that again.
Of course, that's what they want.
Say that again.
What they want
they basically want your lawsuits dismissed so they can come back and say there was never a final determination, and now we're going to come back and do it again.
And start the process all over again on these parents.
God.
That's exactly what they want to do. It's exactly what they want to do. And so, whether the courts are going to allow that or not, we're going to find out. But, we now have this new, because this guidance I told you about that IDPH and ISB put out, if you go look at it, it has all of this recommend and encourage. School districts are going to use that. They're going to use that as the basis to say we're just doing what we're told by the health department. We're just doing what we're told. And they want to try to start this whole thing all over again on these parents.
Well, that is the problem, though, because if it's not masking, it's their transgender policy, which is simply guidance at the state from the Illinois State Board of Education. They have a multi-page document, and in that document, it literally talks about how schools are guided. The guidance is that schools may keep from parents whether or not their children are being treated differently based on being an opposite sex than what their parents agree to, and they may keep that information from the parents. So it's not just masking that the schools themselves are taking guidance and basically converting it into like we have no choice but to do this. And then it's shameful that there's I don't think it's confusion. I think it's intentional. And
I believe
how do we
it is
stop
too.
it?
Well, the parents ultimately have to stop it. But I got another thing on this school district, because again, when school starts here in a few weeks, I have been talking to a few people that have told me that the several superintendents across the state, are calling the governor's office and they're calling the State Board of Education going, you need to tell us how we're going to deal with this because school's getting ready to start and what are we going to do? Because they've got all these people scared to death thinking that kids are going to start falling over. What are we going to do? You got to give us some direction. It's almost like they're looking for the governor to force these things on them like he did last year, but I don't think they're going to get that. And so now, to the extent they don't get that from the governor or from these state agencies, they're going to be sitting there going, we don't know what to do. We need to do what you should have always done, is your local health department has the authority to deal with these things. They just need to do their job. But yeah, this is going to be complicated here in a few weeks.
One thing we're going to do here at Breakthrough Ideas is we're going to be FOIAing our local health department for all correspondence between the local health department and the superintendents to just find out how strong they were in some of that guidance, how it changed over time, where they stand now. Because I think I was tipped off that there's a can of worms there to be found in what the departments of health were saying over time as it relates to COVID and how they're changing their story now. Not to mention they having changed data from week to week when they have updates, and then now hiding data, by the way, too, because they don't want to. They don't want people to have a whole view of what happened.
No, they don't want them to have a whole view. But it's, the story is going to be as this school year starts is how absent, this is my opinion, how absent the governor is going to be from any of this stuff. He is going to absolutely stay away from it, in my opinion, because I don't think his election could stand trying to do what he did last year.
Well, one thing he can't stay away from is the fact that that according to Center Square and other news publications, unsealed records allege that Pritzker oversaw a fraudulent workers' comp payments to former campaign worker. Yeah. So it says that there's a multi-pronged case dealing with alleged taxpayer fraud, and alleges that JB Pritzker's office oversaw worker compensation payments to a former state employee despite the employee's sexual assault claims being unfounded. So, I mean, it's pretty alarming. And when you
it's
get
100% true.
It's just the lawsuit alleged that Thornley, who worked on Pritzker's political campaign in 2018, caused the state to pay her unearned overtime, get reimbursed for travel that did not incur, and other improper reimbursements, and concealed her misconduct. It's just, when does this end? What's going on with this? She was a campaign worker that, of course, got appointed to a policy position with the Illinois State Police Merit Board, and now she's been scamming on work comp, overtime, travel expenses, you name it. When you Google her name, by the way, her name is Jennifer Thornley. This is not a news story. What's new about it is that we've got unsealed records now that corroborate this. But, I mean, back in February 10, 2022, Illinois Times has a headline, another criminal investigation for Jenny Thornley. Back in September 28th, 2021, Jennifer Thornley charged with theft from the State Police Merit Board. Back in September 24, 2021, Illinois official charged with filing false overtime report. I mean, what the hell's going on with this?
There's a lot going on with this. And this issue, Jeannie, as to the workman's comp fraud, it is 100% fraud, not 99, not 98. It is 100%. And there's two pieces to this fraud.
Okay.
You mentioned the one as to that she collected disability benefits based upon an alleged sexual assault that was shown to not have occurred, right?
Right.
The bigger issue is that her claim for workman's comp disability was based upon her putting in there that she worked for the governor's office and the governor was her direct supervisor. She filled out the claim and fraudulently listed the governor's office and the governor himself on that claim, because what that did is when TriStar, the insurance company for the state, started processing that claim, they excluded her real employer, which was the Merit Board. And when the Merit Board tried to intervene and say, wait a second, she doesn't work for the governor's office, she worked for us and she was fired for cause, the records show that Ann Spillane, governor's general counsel, and a guy named Kevin Ritchie from CMS worked to exclude the Merit Board and actually called the insurance company and said, you do not talk to anybody but us. And so there's the fraud that she collected benefits, not based upon facts that turned out to be false, but she collected it on an employer that she had never worked for.
And it comes straight from the governor's office.
Yes.
Who tried to cover it all up.
And then when a lawsuit got filed by Emily Fox from the Merit Board, that lady I got nothing but respect for. She's trying to fight for the taxpayers. She filed a whistleblower action raising all of these issues, and Attorney General Raoul says, there's nothing here. We've looked at it. There's no issue. Using my prosecutorial discretion, dismissed the case. And I'm like, are you kidding me? If I'm Attorney General, somebody's going to prison. And he just dismisses it, because here's why he dismissed it, Jeannie. Here's why. This lady got charged with felony offenses for stealing on the overtime. She's never been charged for the workman's comp fraud, because guess what? If they charge her with the workman's comp fraud, look at all the people that conspired with her to perpetrate that fraud. Who do you think's got the courage to open that up?
Oh my gosh! Well, we got to get to the
not
bottom
all
of this.
Conjecture, ma'am.
Yeah. So what's the next move with this? What's going to happen now?
I mean, the federal prosecutor could pick it up, maybe. I don't know if the federal prosecutor will look at it. Dan Wright from the Sangamon County State's Attorney's Office could prosecute her for workman's comp fraud.
Is he a Democrat or a
again, think about
Republican?
it.
I'm sorry. This is so political in nature. They're covering for
you
MK
file-
Pritzker's friend who
If
who
you
worked
file
out
a
politically.
if you file a workman's comp claim and your application lists somebody you've never worked for, how much more do we need to talk about?
Exactly.
It's fraud.
It's fraud. So where is the state's attorney in prosecuting this white collar crime?
He's not touched it to my knowledge. And let's back up. He didn't prosecute her Dan Wright didn't prosecute her for the overtime fraud. He passed it off to the appellate prosecutor's office and got them to do it. He wouldn't even prosecute that himself directly. I don't know why, but he didn't. And he's not touched this white collar crime here on the workman's comp fraud because, you and I have been around a long time. You know what happens when she gets charged with work comp fraud? She's going to roll on everybody that helped her do it, which has the governor's name all over it, Mrs. Pritzker in some fashion because she got a phone call or two, Ann Spillane, general counsel, licensed attorney in the state of Illinois. All of these people are complicit in that fraud on the work comp issue. And that's in the records. That's not me speculating. It's in the documents.
So, okay, what can we do? What can we do? Do we all go ahead and email this guy, Dan Wright?
Yeah, I mean, Dan needs to be pressured. I mean, think about this too.
Hey, I just looked him up. I mean, he's Illinois College, St. Louis University School of Law. You'd think that he'd know better.
I was able to get the Daily Wire. I worked with the Daily Wire. They wrote an article on this.
Okay.
Greg Bishop wrote an article on it, raising the issue.
Mm-hmm.
But do you see the Tribune writing on it? Do you see, the other newspapers in the North writing on it? You see any of the news stations doing it?
Well, they wrote about the earlier fraud, but not this, and they haven't pushed it.
Well, why? Again, think about the differences I told you between the earlier fraud and this fraud. The earlier fraud as to the workman or the overtime issue, the governor in his office wasn't complicit in that issue. That was completely. Now, she tried to get them to intervene to protect her. Did you see the affidavit where she told a friend of the former executive director that you need to tell him to back off because he doesn't know who he's messing with, and I'll get the governor's office involved? Now, another little caveat, Jeannie, is that
now I'm looking at this. I've been trying to find it, but it looks like Dan Wright is a Republican.
He is a Republican.
Who's a Republican? What the hell's going on?
I don't know. Jack Garcia is the former executive director of the Merit Board. He's the one that Jenny Thornley threatened that if you don't back off investigating me stealing, I'm going to get the governor involved. You remember the Safety Act that got passed?
Yes, we've talked about it a ton.
At 3 o'clock in the morning, they stuck a provision in the Safety Act that caused Jack Garcia to get fired from his job.
Yes, I did read about that.
You think that was just coincidence?
No,
I would suggest not.
Not at all.
But going back to the clear-cut issue, which requires no speculation, is the work comp fraud. I mean, Dan Wright should have absolutely, him or the appellate prosecutor should charge her with work comp fraud. But I'm telling you,
yeah, okay, but is it because nobody's brought charges forward to him? I mean, with these stories out there right now, he should be able to make the charges himself. I'm sure he can. Is he waiting for somebody else? What else would be going on here? Why would he not be charging her?
I would. Now, let me back up.
Does he think it's the purview of the AG's office or some other legal entity?
It's all him. Nope, it's him.
It is him. So he's the one responsible. Okay.
She collected those workman's comp disability benefits until guess when, Jeannie?
I don't know.
When she got charged with the indictment for felonies for the overtime issue, her work comp disability stopped instantaneously once that happened. Even though legally they're two completely unrelated
Well, I
things.
was going to say, why is that? That doesn't make
Politics?
sense. That doesn't make sense. Oh, my gosh. This is a can of worms. If she was hurt on the job, if she's hurt on the job, whether or not she stole from the taxpayers and been charged from the taxpayers is separately a distinct issue. So one is not related to the other. Not at all.
But her work comp disability payment stopped 2 days after she was charged with the crimes in September of 21. So the issue of the work comp has been known to the people on the inside for, 10 months now.
Oh yeah. Well, that's the other thing is like how many people knew about this and said nothing? How many? Who are they? What are their names?
Well, I mean, Raul, let's start with him.
For sure.
Tell me he didn't know.
Yeah.
Governor Pritzker knew.
Definitely.
Ann Spillane knew. She's general counsel for the governor because she's the one, if you go get all the documents on that Facebook Live I did the other night and explained all of this, and
Yes.
I had 15 or 20 documents, the emails are all in there that show that Ann Spillane's the one that made all this happen.
Well, you keep. Oh man, we've got to make you the Attorney General for the state of Illinois. You have to get in there because there's a lot more work to be done. This was just going to be a really short segment with Tom DeVore running for Attorney General. Tom, thank you so much for your insight. We are going to stay on this, and I know that you are going to stay on this. And now I'm going to make some phone calls because I want to know why Dan Wright's not doing his job. And Hey, news to everybody else. I don't care if you're Republican or Democrat. Do your damn job in this state.
That's right. I'll talk to you later.
You bet. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
And that was the real story with Jeannie Ives.